In 2001, prepared jumpers to be specific Jill Hyneth, Wes Skiles, and Jill's significant other, Paul cruised off to investigate one of the biggest Antarctic ice collapses the world. Regardless of their ability, their process was loaded with difficulties, alarming mishaps, and barely getting away from death multiple times. In the present video, their process will be talked about, unwinding each step and sorting out what turned out badly on this endeavor of investigating Antarctic caverns. Interestingly, brought into the world in 1965, Jill was a widely acclaimed cave jumper out of Canada. She had an incredible interest for investigating various regions of the planet, including space. Since there were no space programs accessible in Canada at that point, she checked out cave plunging and let go of her space investigation dreams. Throughout the long term, Jill moved on from York College and proceeded to open a showcasing organization. Alongside that, she likewise saved her energy for plunging alive and showed scuba jumping classes. However, she needed more to satisfy her fantasies about plunging and investigating the submerged world more. She moved to the Cayman Islands in 1991 and opened a jumping lodge. After some time in the Caymans, she returned to Florida, this chance to investigate another domain, cavern jumping. For quite a long time, she worked with Public Geographic and chipped away at many movies with her companion and tutor Wes Skiles. Both shared a common energy for cave plunging, and in the last part of the 90s, an open door emerging out of Antarctica fell into their laps. A gigantic ice sheet had split away from the Ross ice rack, which was subsequently named the B-15 icy mass. When the news was gotten, Jill and Wes involved this as an offering pitch to Public Geographic, who were at that point searching for an extraordinary story to shoot in Antarctica. The ice shelf that severed was simply enchantingly huge. The Ross ice rack is estimated to have an all-out area of 193,000 square miles. The B-15 icy mass what severed was estimated to be 4,200 square miles. With an icy mass multiple times the size of New York City, these numbers were sufficient to make the selling pitch sound energizing and get the expected subsidizing from Public Geographic to investigate this behemoth. In 2001, their process took off. Following 12 days of cruising, the group arrived at the ideal part of the icy mass. From the get-go, it appeared as though a mountain was drifting on top of the water. Huge ice precipices ascending to large number of feet stood apart of the water. As they moved toward the frozen expanse of a more modest Zodiac boat, Jill began giving indications of anxiety. Unfortunate, more for her better half than herself, Jill was scrutinizing the choice and re-examining the entire arrangement. Regardless of the greatness her significant other held in cave jumping, ice cavern plunging was a first for him. He had accomplished various world records for plunging into outrageous profundities of caverns, and stood firm on high footings in cave jumping affiliations. Yet ice caverns are something else entirely. The primary jump from the outset began giving indications of catastrophe. When they ventured into the freezing water, Wes' plunging suit topped off with water. Wes was an accomplished jumper and thusly chose to endure the freezing water sack he was in. Soon after one moment, the entire group, including Jill and her significant other, needed to move towards Wes to get him and return him to the principal boat where he could be heated up before any horrendous harm was finished because of hypothermia. Only 1 moment into the mission, one jumper was presently incapable to plunge. However, the spirits of Jill and John were high. The couple dove back again into the frigid water, this time keeping in mind the desire of finding a cavern they went for. The water temperature was only a degree over freezing, and, surprisingly, in legitimate wetsuits, the jumpers got quick cerebrum freeze-like sentiments. Cutting their direction through the slush of ice, John and Jill then swam into a huge chasm they tracked down in the ice shelf. What they didn't know was that this hole had a profundity of 130 feet and would bring them generally down to the seabed. Following a moment or so of meandering around, searching for some sort of cavern opening, Jill's eyes were locked on a little section just underneath the gigantic ice shelf. They moved toward the opening, and subsequent to swimming through it, they met a plenty of submerged life existing in such profundities. The investigation happened for quite a while before they chose to return to the surface. Returning, they were confronted with an enormous issue. The opening was currently hindered with gigantic pieces of ice. Be that as it may, they didn't overreact and began eliminating the blocks, however much they could. After a critical battle, they arrived back to the surface where festivities anticipated. Albeit the principal trip was a triumph with not many difficulties, Jill's daring soul had not had enough of the ice cave jumping experience. The extremely following day, she chose to return in with her significant other. This time, no matter what the jumpers having more involvement with this cavern, they wouldn't endure without any problem. When they entered the cavern, Jill was hit with a slight flow of water, which she had not experienced previously. In any case, she decided to disregard it, which later ended up being an error. As the two of them dove further down the cavern, the momentum got more grounded, in the end making a surge of water flood the cavern with outrageous tension. Impulse dominated, and Jill penetrated her hand into the ocean bottom to go about as an anchor for her body, so the water wouldn't float her away. Given the tension of the water, her body continued to totally dominate her hand. The gigantic trepidation and frenzy that encompassed Jill is unfathomable. Jill and John rapidly understand that this jump is a catastrophe, and they need to leave before the fight against water and time is lost. Be that as it may, the current just got more grounded and more grounded. With all their substantial strength, they kicked more than once, wanting to move towards the exit. However, all endeavors went to no end against the water momentum. In this frightening situation, the main way for Jill and John to endure was to search for one more way out. A weak blue light sparkled far away, showing the presence of another exit. They let go of themselves and let the ongoing accept them towards the exit, however much they could. Fortunately, this was without a doubt another exit. As they left the cavern, they ended up abandoned in an ice field. In a little while, the boat acted the hero, and they were saved prior to sticking to death. One would envision that such a frightening encounter is enough for a lifetime. Yet, not so much for these three. Jill, John, and Wes were so intrigued with the recording that they chose to go on one final plunge together. Jill, who had previously played out a jump twice earlier, presently had a little break in her glove. Over the long haul, water got into the glove, making her hand freeze. She was unable to take hold of anything. During this, Wes was the final remaining one in line to follow John and Jill. Was lost his ground and, in an endeavor to save him, John turned around. This is a grave slip-up, and over the course of the long stretches of cavern plunging episodes, turning around in such circumstances certainly brings about fatalities. Air was running out, and the current was just getting more grounded. Right away, a flood of momentum hit them so solid that they were pushed down to a profundity of 130 feet, presently lying on the sea floor. It was then that Jill's mastermind became an integral factor. She devised a game plan of guiding their hands into the little openings the fish made in the ice, and utilizing them to hoist themselves out of the water. Following 3 hours of climbing 130 feet of ice submerged, they made it out effectively. They sat on their boat, eating and arranging another plunge they were calling their finale. Notwithstanding, after 2 hours, a cry was heard from the watchboard. They all were ready, and they saw something which shook their spirits. The very chunk of ice they were underneath was currently rolling endlessly, falling to pieces, and weaving all over with savage speed. They understood that, had they been in there, it would have been their last cavern plunging experience of all time. Have you at any point considered an ice shelf to be large as the B-15? Tell us in the remarks area underneath.